So, ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker is Jim Herbertson, Technical Director with IPECA. IPECA is an organization that works on the topic of low-emission pathways for the oil and gas sector. IPECA has, in collaboration with the UN and IFC, developed a shared understanding of how the industry can contribute most effectively. Jim Herbertson, as you see here, has worked for about 40 years, I think, in the oil and gas industry, and joined IPECA in 2017 as Technical Director with Climate and Energy. And the title of his presentation is Low Emission Pathways and Sustainable Development Goals. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. So thank you to Oil and Gas Denmark for the opportunity to talk to you today about our organisation IPECA, the low emission pathways and the sustainable development goals. First thing to say is that energy is key to sustainable development. Energy is at the centre of almost every global opportunity and challenge the world faces today. Access to affordable, reliable energy is essential for the growth of strong economies, long-term improvements in health, quality of life, and the eradication of poverty. Supporting the transition to a lower emissions future while ensuring there is sufficient energy to meet the needs of the world's growing population is key to delivering sustainable development. IPECA members recognise that the production and use of their products contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, and our members recognise that they have a crucial role to play in supporting sustainable development. IPECA was originally established in 1974 at the request of the United Nations Environment to develop a shared industry response to environmental and social issues and a platform to share knowledge and best practice. Our status has allowed us to build strong partnerships and trusted relationships throughout the United Nations system. We remain the oil and gas industry's principal channel of engagement with the United Nations. Our role with the United Nations is not to lobby, but to act as a constructive partner. We inform our members of key UN developments, make fact-based information available globally, build relationships and explore partnerships. We also work in partnership with key stakeholders. This can take the form of formal relationships with UN bodies such as UNEP and the International Maritime Organization, or consultations with key global bodies such as the IFC, the Equator Principles Banks, and other major NGOs. So, for instance, we have participated in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change for over 20 years, and we contributed to the development of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and engage regularly with the respective UN Working Group and its annual forum. And we monitor and contribute to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and we'll be participating in the next COP, which is in Sharm el-Sheikh next month. You can see from this infographic that our members produce over half of the world's oil and gas and have a presence in 180 countries. I'd like to start with a few introductory slides looking at the low emission pathways and the Paris Agreement before switching to talking about how these pathways are interlinked with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There is no single pathway to a net zero emissions future. Finding these pathways is a task for many actors from all sectors of society over the short, medium and long term. Government agencies, consultants, energy companies and academic institutions all publish numerous different scenarios that provide projections of greenhouse gas emissions and energy demand. And IPECA has noted that three elements are common to most of these projected pathways in this energy transition. It goes without saying that the most cost-efficient method of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is to save energy. But this bears repeating over and over again. Reducing the greenhouse gas intensity of power generation can then lead to electrification of other parts of the economy. And the third element, by reducing emissions in other parts of the economy, this will require alternative energy carriers and strategies to that of electrification. For example, aviation might use biofuels, or heavy industry might require application of carbon capture and storage in terms of its industrial application. As I said, the most cost-effective method of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is to save energy. In its recent energy efficiency outlook, which came out a couple of weeks ago, the IEA indicates that globally, energy efficiency gains since the year 2000 prevented 12% more energy use than would have happened in 2017. Furthermore, in the IEA World Energy Outlook, it projects that improvements in production and end-use efficiencies could result in a 12% decrease in energy demand by 2040. In its special report 1.5, which came out earlier this month, the IPCC illustrative pathways project a much stronger improvement in energy efficiency will be needed. To maximize energy saving opportunities, barriers to uptake will need to be addressed, including through increasing the information available to consumers and aligning the motivation of consumers and suppliers to save energy. While efforts to increase efficiency and reduce consumption are critically important, overall these efforts only slow the growth of greenhouse gas emissions, they do not stop it. The power sector accounts for about half of global energy-related emissions. In the near term, one of the most cost-effective and impactful steps that society can take is to switch from coal to natural gas in power generation. This step could cut emissions in half for every unit of electricity generated. Near zero emission options include renewables and nuclear power, along with sustainable biofuels. Longer term, the deployment of gas and biomass-based power generation with carbon capture and storage would enable near zero emission hydrocarbon energy, or even negative emission in the case of biomass. Reducing the greenhouse gas intensity of the power sector could enable widespread electrification of parts of transport, residential, commercial and industrial sectors, thus decreasing their own greenhouse gas intensity in turn. Reducing emissions in other parts of the economy will require alternative energy carriers and strategies to electrification. These include hydrogen, biofuels, industrial CCS, as I mentioned before, and bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. While these technologies continue to be developed, additional technical breakthroughs will be needed to achieve cost-effective deployment at the scale needed to transform the energy system. A variety of processes and services have specific needs for energy density, transportability and scalability, which is why they run on fossil fuels today. In these areas, it is unclear whether they could run on direct or stored electricity, and as such, they will likely require alternative approaches. For example, aviation might use biofuels, or heavy industry such as cement, steel, and petrochemicals might require application of carbon capture and storage. Where there are still residual greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, for instance, these will need to be balanced to deliver carbon neutrality. Carbon capture and storage coupled with biomass offers the promise of net negative emissions to achieve this balance. Switching to the Sustainable Development Goals, in recognition of the need for a balanced and integrated approach to sustainable development, governments agreed through the UN to 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are designed to be achieved by 2030. They set out a holistic call to action for the way the world provides for people, protects the environment and uses natural resources. Significant collaboration by industry, governments, business and civil society will be required to achieve these goals, together with policy action and developments in technology. In our SDG Atlas, the IPCA SDG Atlas, and there's a couple of examples over there on the table, we mapped the oil and gas industry against all 17 of the SDGs. With careful planning and implementation, the oil and gas industry has the opportunity to contribute across all Sustainable Development Goals, either by enhancing its positive contributions or by mitigating negative impacts. This diagram illustrates some of the ways in which the industry can contribute to each of the goals. The SDG Atlas of IPECA maps this in detail and aims to facilitate three outcomes: enhanced understanding of the relationship between the SDGs and the oil and gas industry, increased awareness of the opportunities and challenges that the SDGs pose for the oil and gas industry and its stakeholders, and the ways in which the industry might address them, and multi-stakeholder dialogue and collaboration towards enhancing the contribution of the oil and gas sector in achieving these SDGs. Well, I'd like to show in a bit more detail how the oil and gas industry contributes to sustainable development. These include providing jobs and generating indirect employment opportunities, for instance, contractors and suppliers, enabling development of advanced technologies and products through investment in research and development, encouraging local content and entrepreneurship with associated capacity building benefits. I think you're safe, but it is best to move. That's kind of unexpected. And investing in the long-term social and economic success of the communities in which we operate. We also provide fuel for the global transport system, i.e. road, rail and aviation. We build infrastructure. We contribute tax and other types of revenue to governments, and we supply access to energy that enables economic and social development. The scope and nature of typical oil and gas activities point to some of the Sustainable Development Goals where there are particularly strong opportunities to contribute. I'll mention a couple in passing here and focus on others in subsequent slides. So I'll pick out first SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation. Access to clean water is essential for the health and lives of people, as well as reducing inequality and ending poverty. Yet more than 780 million people worldwide don't have access to potable water, and another 2.8 billion live in water-scarce environments. The oil and gas industry supports access to and sustainable management of water. The overall energy sector, including power generation and all oil and gas production and processing of fuels, accounts for roughly 10% of total global water withdrawals. Of this, production of oil and gas accounts for about 2%. The industry develops water strategies that protect and restore water-related ecosystems in and around our operations. It also works to protect the environment through effective wastewater management and the containment of leaks and spills. I'll also say a couple of words about SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure. Many emerging economies face outdated, overburdened or non-existent infrastructure and a lack of technological skills or the institutions to teach them. And I can see some guys bringing ladders. I hope you're going to do that in the break. Okay, and in a safe fashion. Investment in infrastructure and innovation is critical for sustainable growth, poverty reduction and public health. The oil and gas industry often invests significantly in infrastructure such as roads, telecommunications, ports and local power to enable its own operations and to benefit local communities. Building shared use infrastructure, whereby the oil and gas industry allows other stakeholders to use the infrastructure created for our own operations, is another cost-effective way to improve infrastructure access while also benefiting local communities. Sustainable Development Goal 7 is about access to energy. And as I've said before, providing access to affordable, reliable, modern energy is one of the most important contributions that the oil and gas industry can make. Energy is essential for the growth of strong economies, sustained improvements in the quality of life, and the eradication of poverty. Meeting the world's energy needs in a world of about 9 billion people implies an increase in primary energy demand from around 575 exajoules today to 725 exajoules in 2035. And this is after factoring in energy efficiency and conservation measures. More recent analyses from the IA, the International Energy Agency, and the IPCC indicate that society will need to sharply accelerate energy efficiency improvements over the next decades. In the IA World Energy Outlook, its new policies scenario, it projects that just under half of primary energy usage will be met by oil and gas in 2035. On the slide here, you can see going from the 575 today, oil and gas provides 52% of the world's primary energy, and in 2035 it's 720 exajoules. It's dropped all the way down from 52 to 49%, but the slice of the pie is bigger. So you can see the actual amount of oil and gas needed in 2035 is going to be higher than it is today. Still on SDG 7, I said before, energy is a key driver of sustainable development, without which most of the other sustainable development goals cannot be delivered. Yet in 2015, about 1.1 billion people had no access to electricity. Additionally, an estimated 2.8 billion people globally had to rely on solid fuels, such as wood, charcoal, and animal dung for cooking and heating. This graph shows the current energy system and how energy is used today, and as you can see, transport is the largest share, followed by industry and domestic use. What is also interesting is how that energy is supplied. Some sectors of the economy are almost totally reliant on the energy that oil and gas provides. For instance, the global transportation system. The universal global challenge to ensure access to sustainable modern energy while moving towards a global energy system with net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the second half of this century. And this requires a long-term strategy. This will have to include investment to drastically improve energy efficiency, a substantial increase in the use of renewable and other lower carbon energy sources such as wind, solar, hydroelectric and geothermal, as well as nuclear and cleaner burning natural gas, and also greater deployment of carbon capture and storage. So the oil and gas industry can contribute to SDG 7 by improving access to energy services through shared infrastructure, growing the share of natural gas in the energy mix, increasing the share of alternative energies and technologies in the global energy mix, and improving energy efficiency in operations and of our own production. SDG 13 is about climate action. And at IPECA, we believe it is possible to address climate change risks while also meeting global energy demand and supporting economic development. While oil and gas have enabled industrialization and human development, their use has also contributed to the rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide, which in turn has contributed to a warming of the climate system. As I've said before, while there is no single pathway to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions future, the IPECA SDG Atlas presents a number of actions that could contribute to this transition that stabilizes atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations and global temperatures in line with the Paris Agreement. A low emissions future will look significantly different from the current energy system. It will require concerted scale-up actions by government, business and civil society, and will need to ensure that the transition does not sacrifice economic development, high employment and other social objectives. The oil and gas industry can contribute to SDG Goal 13 by planning strategically for a net zero emissions future, self-assessing carbon resiliency, strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate change impacts, and mitigating emissions within our own oil and gas operations, for instance, minimizing flaring and minimizing methane emissions. We can also help to develop carbon capture and storage that I've referred to before. And we are also in a position to transfer knowledge and skills to other sectors as part of the transformation of the energy system. I picked out here SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, because there is a role for the oil and gas industry in that. It's clear that improving resource efficiency in production, consumption and supply chains is necessary, but it's probably insufficient to match the anticipated growth in demand. Changing consumption and waste patterns, particular consumer lifestyles in the growing middle class in developing countries and in industrialized countries. This is essential for sustainable management of the world's resources, and often this is referred to as the circular economy. The recent IEA special report on petrochemicals, and of course oil and gas are essential as they are petrochemicals. The IEA points out in its summary, and I quote, "Petrochemicals, which turn oil and gas into all sorts of daily products, such as plastics, fertilizers, packaging, clothing, digital devices, medical equipment, clothing, detergents and tires, are integral to modern life." Additionally, the IEA remarks that petrochemicals are key components of a modern energy system and are found in solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, thermal insulation for buildings, and parts for electric vehicles. And in its clean technology scenario, industry and society must achieve ambitious improvements in environmental impacts from manufacturing and use of these petrochemicals, and that's through much higher recycling rates, through better management of water as a resource, and a significant reduction of CO2 emissions by deploying carbon capture and storage in those industrial applications. Oil and gas companies help to meet responsible consumption challenges by mitigating impacts, improving the efficiency of their own operations, by improving energy efficiency, eliminating routine gas flaring, directional drilling when necessary and feasible, developing cleaner fuels and lubricants, sharing energy knowledges and building capacity amongst consumers. Moving away, I guess, from the technical, this slide is more about partnerships are vital. And in an increasingly globalized and interconnected world, commitments to global partnerships are vital for coordinating the efforts of governments, companies, investors, international organizations, and civil society. Meeting the aims of the Paris Agreement and achieving sustainable development requires multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approaches, and many of the challenges to be addressed are beyond the control of an individual company. To realize the full potential and contribution, oil and gas companies need to engage in this meaningful dialogue and need to partner with all types of organizations who are actors in the 2030 agenda, such as governments, other companies, investors, international organizations, and civil society. And just in summary, as I've seen the 2-minute warning bell. In summary, IPECA believes that a transition to a low greenhouse gas emissions world is challenging but possible. Due to the size, complexity, and growth of the energy system and the time it takes to scale solutions, the transition will likely play out over the course of this century with a continuing role for oil and gas. Pathways to a net zero emissions future will require energy efficiency, electrification of new sectors, and alternative energy solutions, such as hydrogen or biofuels in hard-to-reach sectors. Carbon capture and storage offers solutions across all of these, and almost uniquely offers the opportunity for negative emissions. Collaboration will be essential, along with effective policies and, of course, a massive shift in financial flows. The oil and gas industry in IPECA is ready to play its role through the deep skills, knowledge, and resources it has in these types of energy systems. So thank you.